Tony DeWitt, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who tries to make the law make sense here on YouTube. So today we're discussing the Bill Cosby release from prison. Is that a travesty or a triumph? I'll have more on that in just a moment. Bill Cosby invited a woman back to his house, and according to the allegations in the criminal complaint, gave her drugs and then had sex with her that was unconsented to, or non-consensual, I think it's probably the better term. Those were the allegations. So let's unpack this a little bit. First of all, the real problem with Mr. Cosby's case was that there was no initial police report. This event happened, and it took the person who was supposedly taken advantage of more than a year to come forward. And when she did come forward, there were so many problems with the case. For example, if a rape is timely reported, a rape kit can be done, and forensic evidence can be gathered, including evidence from her clothing, evidence from her body. I won't go into the graphic details, but there's lots of things that can be collected in one of those examinations. Because she waited a year to report it, that couldn't happen. Here's how the Pennsylvania Supreme Court described it. They said that in evaluating the likelihood of success of a prosecution of Cosby, the district attorney foresaw difficulties with Constand's credibility as a witness based, in part, on her decision not to file a complaint promptly. D.A. Castor further determined that a prosecution would be frustrated because there was no corroborating forensic evidence. Then there are the issues of credibility, which relate to what does someone expect when they are a younger woman invited to the home of an older man who happens to be powerful and influential? Why do they think they're there? It's probably not to test their acting abilities. So the district attorney in that particular case decided that the only way that this gal was going to get any kind of justice was in the civil courts. Here's what the Supreme Court said. Having determined that a criminal trial likely could not be won, D.A. Castor contemplated an alternative course of action that could place Constand on a path to some form of justice. He decided that a civil lawsuit for money damages was her best option. To aid her in that pursuit, as the sovereign, the district attorney decided that his office would not prosecute Cosby, believing that his decision ultimately would then set off a chain of events that he thought of as a minister of justice would gain some justice for Andrea Constand. By removing the threat of a criminal prosecution, Castor reasoned Cosby would no longer be able, in a civil lawsuit, to invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination for fear that his statements could later be used against him by the Commonwealth. Mr. Castor would later testify that that was his intent. So he made a public statement that he would not prosecute. So with the public statement being that he would not prosecute, Cosby basically gave up his right against self-incrimination and made some statements in the deposition in the civil case that made it look like he had engaged in criminal rape. So that case moves forward, and at the same time, a bunch of other people start coming forward. And it's a basic principle in our criminal justice system that if someone is going to be tried for a crime, they have to be tried for the crime they committed or allegedly committed, not for all the other things that they might have done bad in their life. And so all of these other women started to come forward saying they had had similar experiences and sort of a groundswell built. And then the district attorney who made that statement that he wasn't going to prosecute was replaced by a new district attorney who decided to renege on that promise, and he went after Mr. Cosby, filed a criminal complaint. The first time the case was tried, it was a hung jury. The second time it was tried, it was a conviction. Now, importantly, during the pendency of that case, the lawyers who represented Mr. Cosby repeatedly said, you can't prosecute this man on the basis of those statements. Those statements are not admissible. And the district attorney gave an assurance of non-prosecution. And, Mr. Cosby changed his position in reliance on that statement, and you can't go back on that. And the trial court said, well, show me the documents. Show me the documents that basically where he basically entered into this agreement. And of course, there were no documents because it was a public statement. They didn't enter into some kind of formal agreement. It's just that Cosby, basically relied on the statements made by the prosecutor. So the trial court not only allowed the prosecution to go forward, he allowed the evidence in from those depositions where he had been duped into giving away his right against self-incrimination. And that was what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court found so odious in all of this. Now, a prosecutor can make any agreement that he wants. He can agree not to prosecute. And if someone changes their position on that agreement, then they should never be allowed to go back and change their position a second time. And here's what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said about that. For the reasons detailed below, we hold that when a prosecutor makes an unconditional promise of non-prosecution, and when the defendant relies upon that guarantee to the detriment of his constitutional right not to testify, the principle of fundamental fairness that undergirds due process of law in our criminal justice system demands that the promise be enforced. In the criminal case, the prior prosecutor did come in and testify, yes, I told him I wasn't going to prosecute. And so he confirmed that there was an agreement not to prosecute, and the only way that this gal was going to get any kind of justice was in the civil court system. But that did not sway the trial court judge. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, considered together, these authorities obligate courts to hold prosecutors to their word, to enforce promises, to ensure that defendants' decisions are made with a full understanding of the circumstances, and to prevent fraudulent inducements of waivers of one or more constitutional rights. Prosecutors can be bound by their assurances or decisions under principles of contract law or by application of fundamental fairness considerations that inform and undergird the due process of law. So the question then becomes, is it a travesty of justice or is it a triumph of justice? And a lot of that has to do with which way you're looking at it. The real lesson to be taken out of the Cosby case is that if any person is physically violated, whether they are physically violated knowingly or they are drugged and then physically violated, they should immediately seek help from the police. They should get a comprehensive forensic examination where evidence can be gathered, should make a timely police report, and should set in motion the prosecutorial chain of events. Because if you don't do that, then the likelihood that you will be successful later claiming that you were violated is greatly reduced. It can still happen, but it doesn't often happen. Now, if you're looking at it from the standpoint of it was a he said, she said, and it was always a he said, she said because there was no evidence, then you probably view this as a triumph of justice. The bottom line is that Mr. Cosby did 2 years in jail. He did 2 years in prison. And according to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, he should never have been there. Well, there's no way for this gentleman at his age to get those 2 years back. So, in my view, this is both a travesty and a triumph. It's a triumph that he's out, but it's a travesty that he was ever prosecuted. This is why I think it's very important that the citizens in a locality understand who their prosecutor is and what he does. I have a video on here about your right of access to the courts. That's a very important right. You have the right to go into court and watch your prosecutors at work. Watch how they handle these cases. And you can make some judgments about both their ability and their professional judgment. It's worthwhile to do that because your county may not necessarily be getting the best prosecutorial talent that it could get. So that's something to keep in mind. The only way to ensure that you're having good ethical prosecutors properly go about the process of evaluating criminal acts is to follow up and stay vigilant. Well, that's my take on the Cosby case. I hope that you found this entertaining or at least informative about what happened and give you a little bit of background and an opportunity to think about what happened. As I said, I believe it's both a travesty and a triumph, and I feel bad for Mr. Cosby, but I also feel bad for his victim because she did not come forward. And the lesson here really is, if it happens, you have to do something about it right then and there. And this is something that our college students are learning all across the country through Title IX cases. If something happens and you believe it happened in a way that violates your rights and violates, your own physical integrity, then you have to go and do something about it right that very minute. I'd really appreciate it if you'd smash that like button for me, and also if you would go over there and smash on the subscribe icon and become a subscriber to our channel and tap on the notification bell so that you get all of the notifications when we release a video here on this channel. Thank you so much for watching. Have a terrific day.